The banging on my door came at 3 in the morning, hard enough to rattle the windows, and I was already reaching for the shotgun beside my bed before I even opened my eyes. I live alone on the side of a mountain, 2 hours from the nearest town, and nobody knocks on my door at 3 in the morning. Not ever, not once in the 6 years I have lived here. I moved through the dark cabin with my heart slamming against my ribs, the old floorboards creaking under my bare feet, and I stopped at the door and pressed my eye to the small gap in the curtain beside it. There was a shape outside, tall, too tall, wider than any man had a right to be, hunched over like it was trying to make itself smaller, one massive hand braced against my porch post, like it was the only thing holding it up. I almost did not open that door. I want to be honest about that. Every instinct in my body told me to grab my phone, call for help, and wait in the dark with the shotgun across my knees until the sun came up. But then the shape made a sound. A low, ragged sound, like something breathing through broken glass. And it was such a human sound, such a tired and hurting sound, that my hand moved to the lock before my brain caught up with it. I opened the door 2 inches, shotgun raised, and the porch light flickered on over a face that was not a face at all. Gray skin, plated like armor across the cheekbones, eyes the color of amber with a crack running through one of them, and blood, dark and strange, running down one side of a jaw that looked like it had been built by someone who had never seen a human being. I should have screamed. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I stood there frozen, the barrel of my gun pointed at a chest that rose and fell in short, painful gasps, and the creature looked at me with those cracked amber eyes and said, in a voice that scraped like stone on stone, one single word: "Please." I do not know why I lowered the gun. I have asked myself that question every single day since, and I still do not have a clean answer. Maybe it was the way his legs buckled right after he said it. Maybe it was the fact that whatever he was clearly running out of time. Maybe some part of me simply could not stand there and watch something beg and then die on my porch. I caught him under one massive arm before he hit the ground, and he was heavier than 3 grown men, and I do not know how I got him through that door, but somehow I did, and somehow I got him onto the rug in front of my cold fireplace, and somehow I got a blanket around a body that was leaking a dark fluid onto my floor that was definitely not human blood. His name, he told me later, in gasps between clenched teeth, was Corveth. He did not give me a last name that night. He barely gave me anything that night except the sound of his breathing slowing down, evening out, steadying, while I knelt beside him with clean towels and a bowl of warm water, and no idea in the world what I was actually doing. By sunrise, the immediate danger had passed, or so I believed. His breathing was steady. The wound across his ribs, 3 long gashes that looked like they had been carved by claws the size of kitchen knives, had stopped bleeding and had already begun closing in a way no human wound ever could. I sat in the chair across from him, shotgun across my lap, and waited for him to open his eyes again. When he did, the first thing he did was apologize. He said his ship had gone down somewhere above the ridge, that he had crawled for what he guessed was 6 or 7 hours across broken ground, with something hunting him the entire way, and that my cabin, my small, isolated, forgotten cabin, was the first light he had seen in the darkness. I asked him what had done that to him. I asked him if it was still out there. He went very still when I asked that, still in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up, and then he told me the truth, plainly, without any attempt to soften it, because I would learn over the following days that Corveth did not know how to soften anything. He told me he was being hunted, not by an animal, by a squad of trained killers who had followed him across 3 star systems because of something he knew, something he carried, something that made him worth more dead than any bounty in recorded history. He told me they would have already scanned this mountain, when he told me they would find this cabin within a day, maybe 2, and that when they did, they would not care that I was an ordinary man with no idea what any of this meant. I remember standing up so fast the chair fell over behind me. I remember telling him he needed to leave, right then, that this was not my fight, that I had a quiet life on this mountain, and I intended to keep it that way. He did not argue with me. He did not beg again. He simply nodded, pulled the blanket off his shoulders, and tried to stand, and the moment his weight came down on his legs, He collapsed onto my floor with a sound of pain he could not hold back, and I understood in that instant that he could not leave. Not like this. Not for days. So I made a decision that changed everything that came after it. I told him he could stay in the woodshed behind my cabin, out of sight, until he could walk without falling, and in exchange, he was going to tell me exactly what was hunting him, and exactly how much danger I had just put myself in. The days that followed were strange in a way I still find difficult to describe. Corveth healed fast, faster than anything I had ever seen, but even his healing had limits, and for the first 2 days he could barely sit upright. I brought him food. I brought him water. I sat with him in the dim light of the woodshed and listened to him explain, piece by piece, what he actually was. He was a soldier, he said, from a world so far away that its light had not yet reached my sky. His people had bred him and trained him from birth for a single purpose, to fight in a long and grinding conflict between his people and another. A war that had gone on so long that nobody alive remembered exactly how it started. He had been very good at his purpose. Better than good. He used words like undefeated and champion, with no pride in his voice at all, only exhaustion, the way a man might describe a job he had never been allowed to quit. 2 weeks before he crashed into my mountain, he told me, he had discovered something during a mission that his own commanders did not want discovered. A truth about the war, about why it had never ended, about who was actually profiting from keeping it going. He would not tell me the details that first night. He said the details were dangerous enough to get me killed just for hearing them, and I did not push him. What he did tell me was that the moment his commanders learned what he knew, they had ordered him captured or killed, whichever proved easier, and had sent a squad after him, specifically built for that purpose. Elite trackers, merciless, loyal only to the ones who paid them. I asked him, on the 3rd night, sitting on an overturned bucket in that cold woodshed, with a lantern between us, why he had not simply surrendered whatever secret he was carrying and saved himself the trouble. He looked at me for a long moment before he answered. He said that if he surrendered it, thousands more of his people and thousands more of the enemy he had spent his whole life fighting would keep dying for a war that could have ended years ago. He said he would rather die running than live having handed that truth back to the people who wanted it buried. I remember sitting there in the dark, looking at this enormous, terrifying stranger, and realizing that whatever else he was not a liar, and he was not a coward, and somehow that mattered more to me than the fact that armed killers were possibly closing in on my mountain at that very moment. The trackers found us on the 5th night. I heard it before I saw it, a low hum in the sky that did not belong to any aircraft I had ever heard, cutting through the silence of the mountain like a blade through fabric. Corveth heard it half a second before I did, and I watched him go from lying on a pile of blankets, weak and half-healed, to standing fully upright with an expression on his face that I had not seen from him before. Not fear, focus. He told me to get down, to stay low, to turn off every light in the cabin, and I did not argue with a single word of it. We crouched together at the edge of the woodshed, watching through a gap in the wood as a shape descended out of the clouds, sleek and dark and utterly silent once it stopped moving, hovering above the tree line like something that did not belong to this world at all. Because it did not. 3 figures dropped from its underside and landed without a sound on the ground below, and even from that distance I could see they were not human, not quite, tall and lean in dark plating with weapons held low and ready, in a way that told me they had done this many, many times before. Corveth grabbed my arm, his grip so tight it left marks that lasted a week, and pulled me back through the tree line behind the cabin, moving faster than I would have believed possible for someone who had been unable to stand 3 days earlier. We ran, I do not know for how long enough that my lungs burned and my legs shook, and the cold mountain air felt like knives in my throat, long enough that the lights of my cabin disappeared behind us. Corveth kept one hand on my shoulder the entire time, steering me around rocks and roots I could not see, and somewhere in the middle of that desperate run through the trees, I understood that he was not running to save himself. He could have outrun me easily. He was running to keep me alive. We found shelter in a shallow cave above the ridgeline, one I had explored years earlier and half forgotten, and we pressed ourselves into the dark and waited, and I have never in my life felt fear the way I felt it in that cave, listening to the low hum of that aircraft pass overhead once, twice, 3 times, searching. Corveth spoke to me in a whisper so quiet I had to lean close to hear it. He told me that if they found us, I needed to run, immediately, without looking back, and that he would give me the time to do it. I told him I was not leaving him. He looked at me with something in those cracked amber eyes that I still think about, something that looked almost like disbelief, like nobody had ever told him that before. The hum grew louder, and then it stopped, directly above us, and I felt Corveth's whole body go rigid beside me in the dark. They had found the cave. What happened next is difficult for me to put into simple words, because it happened so fast, and because so much of it happened in near total darkness. I heard movement outside the cave entrance. I heard a voice, cold and flat, speaking words I did not understand through some kind of translator, and then Corveth was moving, pushing me hard against the back wall of the cave with one arm, while stepping forward to meet whatever was coming through that entrance. There was a burst of light, blinding white, and a sound like the air itself cracking apart, and I pressed myself into the stone and covered my head and prayed in a way I had not prayed since I was a child. When I opened my eyes again, the cave entrance was full of smoke and dust, and Corveth was standing in the middle of it, breathing hard, one shoulder bleeding again, but standing. Beyond him, through the settling dust, I could see 2 of the 3 figures on the ground, not moving. The third one was gone, retreated, or fled, I never learned which. Corveth turned to check on me, and that single moment of turning away from the entrance was almost the last mistake he ever made. I saw the shape rise up behind him in the smoke, weapon raised, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed a loose stone from the cave floor, as big as my 2 fists together, and threw it as hard as I have ever thrown anything in my life. It struck the figure across the side of the head hard enough to knock its aim wide, and the shot that would have hit Corveth square in the back instead tore through the stone above us, and Corveth spun and closed the distance in less than a second, and the fight ended almost as quickly as it began. I will not describe the details of what happened in that final struggle. I do not think about it in detail, even now, and I do not think it needs to be relived in the telling. What matters is that when the dust finally settled and the cave went quiet again, only 2 of us were still breathing. Corveth sank down against the cave wall, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked genuinely afraid, not of the trackers, not of dying, but of something else entirely. He looked at me and said my name, quietly, and asked me why I had thrown that stone. He asked me why I had not simply run when he told me to. I did not have a clever answer for him. I told him the truth, which was that somewhere over the last 5 days, in a cold woodshed on the side of a mountain, he had stopped being a stranger to me, and I was not built to watch a friend die if there was anything at all I could do about it. He did not say anything for a long time after that. He just sat there, breathing, staring at the cave wall, and something in his face had changed in a way I could not fully name, and I understood later that in that moment, for the first time in his entire life, someone had chosen to fight beside him for no reason at all, except that they cared whether he lived or died. We stayed in that cave until the sky began to lighten, and then we made our way back down to the cabin, slow and careful, checking the sky every few minutes for any sign of that dark, silent aircraft returning. It did not return. Whatever had happened to the third tracker, he had not come back for another attempt, and the wreck of Corveth's ship sat undisturbed on the ridge exactly where it had crashed. Over the following 2 weeks, Corveth healed fully, and in that time, we talked more than I have talked to anyone in years. He told me about his world, about a sky that turned 3 different colors depending on the season, about a childhood spent training instead of playing, about a life built entirely around a war he had never chosen, and had spent every day of his life fighting because he did not know any other way to exist. I told him about my own life too, about why I had moved to this mountain in the first place, about the noise and the crowds and the endless small dishonesties of the world I had left behind, and about how much quieter, and somehow, how much more honest, everything felt up here. He asked me once, near the end of those 2 weeks, why humans built cabins on mountains at all, why we chose distance from each other when his own people had never been given the choice to be alone, even once in their lives. I told him that sometimes people need quiet to figure out who they actually are, separate from what everyone else expects them to be. He sat with that answer for a long time. On the morning he finally repaired enough of his ship to fly, using parts I helped him carry down from the wreck site over the course of several days, he stood on my porch and told me he did not know how to properly thank someone for what I had done. He said where he came from, gratitude was always tied to a debt, always came with a price attached, and he did not know how to offer me thanks with no strings attached, because nobody had ever offered him a reason to learn. I told him he did not owe me anything. I told him that where I came from, sometimes people simply helped each other because it was the right thing to do, and that was allowed to be the whole reason, with nothing else underneath it. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something I will remember for the rest of my life. He said that in all his years of fighting, across every version of himself his people had built and trained and sharpened for war, nobody had ever taught him that lesson, and that I had taught it to him in 5 days on the side of a quiet mountain, without ever raising my voice or asking for anything in return. Before he left, he told me the truth he had been carrying, the secret his own commanders had tried to kill him over. I will not repeat it here. It is not mine to share, and some truths are heavier than the person telling them, and I think he trusted me with it, not because I needed to know, but because after everything we had survived together, he needed one person in the universe to simply know that he had been right to run. He promised he would find a way to end the war properly, using what he knew, without letting it cost more lives than it already had. I do not know if he succeeded. I have no way of knowing. He flew off that ridge on a clear morning, with the sun just breaking over the tree line, and the sky swallowed him whole within seconds, and I stood on my porch and watched the spot where he disappeared for a long time after he was already gone. My mountain is quiet again now. The woodshed is empty except for firewood. The cave above the ridgeline is just a cave again, no different from any other, unless you know exactly where to look for the marks left behind on its walls. But every night, before I go to sleep, I look up at the stars, and I wonder which one of them Corveth is under right now, and whether the galaxy's greatest warrior ever found a way to stop fighting long enough to simply exist, the way he learned to, for just a little while, in my small mountain cabin. I believe he did. I have to believe he did. Because if a being built entirely for war could learn something as simple and as human as trust in 5 short days, then maybe there is hope for the rest of us too, no matter how long or how hard our own private wars have been. And if he is out there somewhere, looking up at his own unfamiliar sky the way I look up at mine, I hope he remembers that somewhere on a small, quiet mountain, in a cabin at the edge of the trees, the door is still open, and always will be, whenever he decides to come home.